All right. Ready, Leah?
Ready. Hello and welcome to Low Carb Conversations. I'm your host, Leah Williamson, and I'm with my host, Holly Barrett. Welcome, Holly.
Hi.
I'm really excited for today's guest. She is a master mind, body, energy healer, author, yoga and meditation teacher, Dr. Alison Kay. Welcome to the podcast, Dr. Alison. So glad to have you in here. Dr. Alison is considered one of the leading experts in her field. She's taught around the world. She's written 3 books, and I can't wait to talk all about it. So, Dr. Alison, would you mind telling us a little bit about yourself? I'm also really excited to learn a little bit more about the chakras and how you integrate those into your healing modalities. So, please take it away and share with us.
Okay, so thank you for having me here. I'm really excited to be on a low carb geared show because I have the background I have as a personal trainer and in fitness nutrition. And so I do approach the energy medicine work from a very different perspective than the average person, including the chakras. So I started out my gig going to university for my bachelor's in psychology, and about 3 months in, I was aware they weren't teaching me how to be the happiest, most thriving version of myself. And so I switched majors and ended up with the bachelor's in English literature, studying humans and society and psychology through an art form. I moved out west to San Francisco to get my master's in creative writing, and serendipitously or synchronistically was brought into politics and really in protecting the environment and getting people elected to federal and state legislature that were going to write environmentally protective and conservation geared legislation, not just vote for it, but actually write it. It's very logical, really good strategy. And so I hit my stride there, having a lot of success, and had a fair amount of stress because of the success. They were putting me in even more intense, stressful campaigns. So I was walking through a library, and not a library, a bookstore in San Francisco, and a book jumped off the shelf, stopped me in my tracks, and was on meditation. So I began to meditate. And at that point, I think I was age 20, if not 21. And so I had already been looking at the I Ching. I'd already been visiting the huge, I think what is America's best Chinatown in San Francisco. In college, I had taken yoga. I had already and was continuing to do Native American medicine wheel ceremonies. So I was always seeing, not from a potential of healing, but from how can we be the most thriving versions of ourselves, the most joyous versions of ourselves, and live up to our potential. And so from there, campaign season ended. I went overseas, backpacked around for a bit. It was my second time overseas, and then came back to the States, went for my master's, all about protecting the environment, got it in public administration, graduated, looked for a job, had that sense of hitting a wall, wasn't filled with grace and ease. So I was asking, okay, and then what's up? And then I got, okay, so if change is going to happen, the fossil fuel industry isn't ready yet. It's way too still entangled. And so if change is going to happen, one consciousness at a time is the way to do it. Meanwhile, as I was graduating in my last year of my master's, I picked up my first energy medicine modality. So I added that on to, and I had been teaching meditation to adults at a local community center. So I went into classroom teaching, and alongside that ran energy medicine sessions and holistic health and wellness sessions alongside as a second revenue stream. Was in like my 3rd session or so with a client in a series of 10 one-on-one energy medicine and holistic health and wellness sessions. She was getting great results. I was super thrilled. She was too. My hands were over her belly, her abdomen, the solar plexus, top of it, and the sacral chakra, the lower part of it. And I asked, well, how can I get even more robust results for my clients? About that same time, within a week or 2, I was balancing my checkbook in pre-digital banking days, and wasn't digging what I was seeing because I had already been overseas, traveling around the world for a couple of different times, living at certain lengths of time overseas as an expat. And the sense of adventure wasn't there in my life. I was perceiving the sense of being caged for decades. And my checkbook wasn't easily balancing. I wasn't liking what I was seeing. And I had a master's degree, for God's sakes. And I hadn't taken out massive student loans. I'd worked all my way through my master's. So that wasn't okay with me. So I started asking my guidance, okay, show me, and so I, within a month, had a colleague tell me about the international school system. So I did what I had to do, traveled where I had to. All the heads from all these different international schools flew in, had a bunch of interviews, had a bunch of job offers, chose Asia. Taiwan, the small democratic island south of the mainland China, because I knew that between both the yogic culture, the Hindu Indian culture, as well as the Chinese culture in Taiwan, were where not only subtle energy and the way it flows was understood, but they were still operating from it, right? Whereas like here in the West, we have the alchemist tradition, and then they went underground and became secret societies as the Age of Reason and Enlightenment all came in. So yeah, I returned here after a decade. I became a Qigong teacher. I became a yoga teacher, trained in India, was teaching yoga and meditation to students, the kids applying to the Ivy League schools, coming back to the States from the international schools that loved being taught meditation. Some of them even said to me, I wouldn't have been able to get through the college app process as successful as I did if I hadn't learned meditation, and was running energy medicine sessions to both expats and the local Taiwanese, Chinese while there. And came back to the States after having written my first book, which came out of my dissertation for my PhD, just really aware that if we had the kind of understanding of how much power is accessed when we go within, and if we were to understand how our subtle energy system works and our consciousness works in collaboration with it, we would have so much less suffering and so much more thriving in all areas of our lives, financially, romantically, professionally. So that's been my mission mostly since, or it has been my mission mainly, except then in 2011, Voice America approached me and they asked me to do a radio show. And on the Mayan galactic alignment in December, on the 21st in 2012. And I was doing nothing in my business. I had taken a client on a VIP retreat there to the Mayan ruins, Chichen Itza, the main ruin in the Yucatan of Mexico. But I wasn't talking about it. And so I had no idea why they had approached me. And I said as much and said, okay, why don't you give me 48 hours and I'll get back to you. And then my intuition was like a neon letter wattage, billboard size, like, yes. So I did it and interviewed a bunch of specialists and experts who I had quoted in my first book about all the different tools at that point that had been created to measure subtle energy so people could have the proof. But I also started to bring on scientists and experts around what December 21st, 2012 meant, learned that it wasn't just to the Mayans. Yogi Bhajan understood that it was the end in 2012 of an old yuga or era and the beginning of a new one. In astrology, they understand we've ended the age of Pisces. We've now moved into moving into the age of Aquarius. So it's a massive shift, and it's from 2012 to 2032. And this 20-year window is understood to be my second book subtitle. My publisher knows my mission. And so he's like, you have to make this your subtitle, Easing Humanity's Evolutionary Transition, because it is considered our most intense evolutionary movement ever in the history of humans. So these are intense times, but it seems like we've gone through the crumbling of the old structures, the old institutions, the old ways of banking, educating, health, all of the stuff that's been out of alignment, or where there's been abuses of power, or where there's been hidden secrets that aren't in alignment with the highest ideals. It's all been crumbling. And that's why we've seen the protests in cities and countries we don't typically see them in, like in Russia and in Chile. There's this equalizing that's in process. There's this going from division, which is really hard to believe if you live in the States in particular, and polarity into unity. So I know that in the natural way a body lets go of old blockages and heals and moves beyond them, it's like a fever a lot of the times peaking before it breaks, right? So that's what we've been experiencing a whole lot of, especially, and COVID was coming in on that because more clearing was still needed. And we're just starting to turn the corner into the now building of this new era. So those two combined have become my mission, to help people understand the nature of the times we're in, and that if you were to work with your consciousness and your subtle energy system, as we're meant to in this time now, especially, you would have thriving beyond. Because my third book subtitle is how to access the field. It's called Reasonable Dragons. It's the title. And then how to access the field of unlimited possibilities so that logical magic is the new norm. So I'm not talking about abandoning irrational thought at all, obviously. I'm talking about not even balanced left brain, right brain hemisphere. I'm talking about a whole brain consciousness where there's integration with both skill sets that we have: rational thought, intuitive awareness, masculine, yang, feminine, yin, because that great rebalancing is happening now in these times too. So I think that's enough for now. You did a lot of listening.
Well, thank you for sharing this. It seems like you had, well, I'm assuming anyway, but correct me if I'm wrong, you had a very just traditional or regular upbringing, American style upbringing. And then something, did you always feel there was something inside of you that was maybe, I won't say different, but wasn't like everybody else, a kind of thing, to understand that you had this energy? Or was it through your learnings that you came to understand about your intuition and how you were accessing those kind of modalities?
Oh, that's such a great question at the timing you're asking it. I didn't have a crisis. I didn't have a trauma. I didn't have a drama to overcome to cause me to look for an alternative method of healing, because mainstream Western medicine wasn't curing an issue or a crisis or a struggle. That is not how I came to this. All the PR people who have ever worked for me have asked me for that struggle story of my journey. And I've had to wrestle with them, helping them understand that's not my gig. I grew up walking through the woods with, and it's an important point to make because so many people expect that.
Definitely.
Yeah. So I won't talk about it because you nod so readily, you get it. I was walking through the woods with my older brother day in and day out, and he was walking ahead of me, tromping on like the broken branches and breaking them even more. And I was like connecting in with the dragonflies and the creeks and the little cloves and the trees and the leaves and the animals and the just totally connected to everything, feeling totally safe. And as a matter of fact, a group of him and his friends, I was the only girl, a group of neighborhood boys, the ice was breaking. I grew up in Boston, outside of Boston by 30 minutes. And they all were looking at a patch of this ice up at a pond area, and it was going to go under the road that we lived on. There was this tunnel, and then emerge on the other side of the road, which became the creek. And they're like, hey, somebody should float on the ice and go into the tunnel. None of them would do it. They were all at least 5 years older than me, the bunch of wusses. I was the only female, and I'm the one who did it. And I'll never forget, like, I don't know, I was probably 11 or 10. And as I was coming underneath the tunnel and I was looking up, they were all like on that side looking down at me, just in awe. Like the girl was the one with the, cojones to do that. But I felt safe in nature. I felt safe. I knew there was something bigger, always a force with me, helping me. And so then in my later teens, I started to journal just naturally. Nobody suggested it. And I was connecting it with my higher self and bringing down and in that voice much more, without intentionally saying, I'm bringing down and in this voice so I can connect with it much more. This is my intuition. This is my higher self. Never knew any of that. Just did it. And then, saw myself in my late teens being led to the Native American medicine wheel ceremonies and the Chinatown in San Francisco, yoga in college. But then over, as I said, the I Ching, and just started to let it continue to evolve, just following my guidance.
Yeah. That's a great story to share. Thank you. And like you said, you don't have to have a crisis, and maybe that guidance you just felt naturally, and perhaps it's your role as a facilitator and a teacher that's driving this through for everyone. So thank you for sharing. I might hand over to Holly now, who's going to delve a little bit deeper into asking questions around what holistic energy is and whether it's and healing, and whether it's right for you or not.
Okay, but hold on one second, Leah, because I think that you're right, and I'm really grateful to you for what you just said, because I have been realizing that emerging, like how important it is to clarify there was no crisis. Thankfully, it's a natural ability that I have just learned how to listen to and bring forth, and that's a very different type of facilitator, especially of energy medicine, than the majority, and even how people understand why would I go to alt medicine, which I don't even call it anymore. So thank you for that feedback. I appreciate it.
No problem.
I think as humans, we are spiritual beings, and I think that we're born with that innate intelligence. We're born with that intuition. We're born connected to nature and our environment. And it's just somewhere, whether it's through our environment as we're grown up, but we're taught to ignore that or to move past from that. And so, yeah, it doesn't take a trauma to come back to that if you've never left it.
If you've never
So,
left, well said.
yeah. Yeah. So that's a great
That's
story
great
and a good
story.
point. This first article here, it is called How to Know Holistic Energy Healing is Right for You. And really, this article just explores this question of when the time might be right for someone to explore alternative healing modalities, specifically energy healing. And the standard definitions of healing, they have something to do with restoring your health, physical healing, treatments that would address conditions or illness, etc. But what is meant by holistic? I think people might have different ideas or definitions of what holistic is and what their idea of holistic energy healing. So, what do those terms mean to you, Dr. Allison?
Well, thanks. This is an interesting question to me because, frankly, using and thinking of working with one's subtle energy system as for healing only, to me, that's boring. And it's old school because I'm all about reaching. I never approach this from healing. And I used to do health stuff. I mean, I'm talking about like literally clearing brain tumors off of a person, out of a person's head. So that's off the MRI and the doctor stands there nodding, going, I don't know what you're doing, but keep doing it. This is a miracle. People's colonic cancer being contained enough so that, or even breast cancer being contained enough so then they could go and get surgery and just have it cut out with not even needing morphine, surprising nurses and doctors after the surgery, getting out of the hospital days sooner. So that took a lot out of me. I had to go really high and it was a lot of heaviness because the way subtle, so the Tibetans have this range. There's subtle energy and then there's crude. Crude is the most physicalized. Like if you're sitting in an IMAX movie theater and you're hearing the big loud booms of a tank blowing up or something blowing up, all that big, loud, physically tangible stuff, that's considered crude because it's just so physical. And then there's this whole spectrum that then leads you to the most subtle. So even as I teach and train my students in vibrational upgrade medicine, part of my vibrational upgrade system, which is a combination of energy medicine and applied mindfulness, they have this range I watch that I take them through of learning to hear even more and more subtle and tune into even more and more subtle. So first it starts with the energy flow in their bodies so that they can then translate that to clients. And then I take it to the energy flow with your intuition and attuning more and more subtle to hear and understand the perceptions you're getting. And then I take it to the earth, to sacred sites on the planet to then help the planet as they progress in higher levels with me. So as you hear me saying, the bottom line here to answer your question is that I've been using it to reach untapped human potential. So holistic to me, I'll never forget, here's another story. My first public talk I gave when I got back from Asia. And this was the worst culture shock I had, no matter what culture I moved to live with, because I lived within, you don't need to know, a lot of different cultures. The worst shock was coming back here. Took me about, I don't know that I've ever adjusted, frankly. It took me about 2 years to even begin to not have difficulty. That sounds funny. I wasn't having a bunch of difficulty, but to be more comfortable, let's say. So as I'm in that time, I had my first talk like within, I think it was a month after my return. I'm giving my first signature talk, The Nature of the Mind, based on meditation and all that I'd learned and had been teaching. And I had an integrative medicine doctor in the audience. And that was when it was just coming online. I don't know if it's like that over in Australia. You guys have that term over there? Yeah.
Yes, we do.
Yes, we
yeah.
do.
Yeah. So it was really trending at that time and just starting. And so he was in the audience listening to me, approached me after, asked me to come to his clinic if I'd be interested in working with him. And I did. And I went in with my whole 3-ring binder with all of my certificates and some of my major work. And he's like, Alison, you've got to be able to focus on one thing. And I looked at him and I'm like, but this is the definition of holistic. This is about the mind and consciousness. This training's about the body. This training's about this. What? You're an integrative, you know, I was flabbergasted. So I agreed to not work for him or at his clinic. But to me, a chakra, Leah, you asked about this too. So a chakra from Hindu to English means wheel. And as you can see me turning my hands here, they're meant to turn vital life force energy, which is the English phrasing for chi, as in qigong, which I also teach, or tai chi. All martial arts is based on qigong. So chi means the same as ki, as in Reiki, and the same as prana, as in yoga. And it's all vital life force energy that our consciousness and our subtle energy system, meaning the chakra column, and then all the side routes. If you think of a chakra as a city, like Brisbane or like Oklahoma City, and all the interstates, highways, side roads lead to it. Those are the meridians, or in yoga, we call them nadis. So the energy travels on all these little smaller pathways, but there's a major column. You can see it over my shoulder there. That's the chakra column. So if we have, every chakra covers a part of life, a belief. And so the root chakra is my right. I feel I have the right to be here. Let's say the solar plexus chakra, the third one up at the upper belly, the digestive tract, is I have the right to desire what I desire. They cover, every domain of life is covered by one of the chakras. So if you have unconscious or subconscious beliefs, traumas, karma, imprints, conditioning, old contracts, and a few other things, then you're going to have a block at that appropriate chakra. And then the wheel isn't going to turn the vital life force energy. So that area is going to be tighter, whether it's, so two people could be in a car accident, same impact, same car, same speed, same level of health, except one of them could have an open throat chakra. So the vital life force energy is turning around. So it's more buoyant, and the other one doesn't. And that one gets whiplash, and this one doesn't. Like, I was in an accident. I was hit head on by a drunk driver, thrown up in the air on my scooter in Taiwan 3 times, landed back down on my head. And the doctor said, you know, most people would have died if not been paralyzed. I was totally fine, literally not even a problem with my neck. I know some of that was because I'm a personal trainer, it was my musculature, but a lot of it was what I just described. So while we could say it's energy healing, I don't even call myself a healer. It can be used to heal health issues from the most holistic perspective. It's to thrive. But we're such a problem-based culture. I have my first book's title, What If There's Nothing Wrong? For a purpose, coming from the East, being steeped in their teachings for a decade, asking to learn and immersing myself, coming out with my first book at that point being, what if there's nothing wrong? Because if we worked with our consciousness and then our subtle energy shifted, we would live in a heart that's trusting. Even when our mind, our ego mind, as it's called in meditation, wants to interpret an event as bad, we would kick back. I just did this about an hour ago. We would kick back in our heart, because our heart would be, we would be so in the flow, in alignment, connected, that we would know all of life is happening for me, not to me. I can trust this event because I know it's not a bad thing. Thank you, mind, for that possible interpretation. But I know that this is actually part of a bigger readjustment my higher self and the universe is in cahoots making, because I asked for it. So I went in a lot of different levels there, but the bottom line to me is we don't go to alternative medicine because we're looking for alternative healing. We live our lives from the holistic perspective, then we won't even need healing.
That's a good point. And I think Leah and I practice this way when it comes to nutrition. Like, people, our clients will come to us and we'll start asking about sleep and stress and how's your life spiritually? How are your relationships? I'm like, wait, what does this have to do with nutrition and how I'm eating? It's like, well, they all work together, because if something's off, then it's going to throw off everything else. Nutrition is there to support your body in all of those other elements, but you can't separate one from the other. You can't compartmentalize things the way we do in Western culture here. And I like how you mentioned how it was such a shock for you to come back to the States, because I feel like even though we've come a long way when it comes to health and healing. And we do use terms like root cause and integrative. I still feel like there really is a disconnect. And now, like chiropractors and acupuncturists, those will be covered under healthcare plans, but they're still considered kind of like quackery. And maybe it's just there because people are asking for it, but it still kind of goes unrecognized or is kind of taboo to think of those things as healing energy.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. I write about this in my first book. Why are we so hesitant? Um, and it is fascinating to me. And it's part of what I was talking about when alchemy went underground and we adopted the age of reason. Part of what's rebalancing, which I also spoke about, is the masculine and the feminine. And I find in my third book, I go into this a lot. Rational thought, the scientific method, for example, that came in through the age of reason, is the ego mind, is the intellect. It's left-brained. It's more about action and the visible and proof. Very yang, because the yang of the yin yang is the masculine. I don't mean to say men, women. I do mean to say within each of us, masculine, feminine, because we have both those traits. So when I'm taking action, when you're taking action out there in the world, that's yang. Sun is yang. When we're sitting and meditating, or we're sitting and listening, or we're journal writing, or we're just out in nature, or we're watching a sunset and we're quiet and we feel expansive and soft and we're listening within, that's yin, moon, yin, feminine. So we've been dominated by a patriarchy and a masculine approach for centuries in the West. They're not given way easily. It's a very, 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 very bloody, profitable situation for a lot of people. And the only reason why, as you said, that little bit of impatience there in my tone, was there not? And as you said, the only reason that it's covered right now, even acupuncture and chiropractic, is because people are demanding with their dollars. It's the same thing with organic produce. I've been buying organic food since I was in my late teens. I've been paying prices that are like five times what they are now. Now that there's more people doing it, so the prices have come down because the market demands it. The market forces, right? So there's this whole element of suppression that's happened. And really it is our voices coming out. And so one of the things that, if you know, in the movie, have you guys ever seen, I don't even remember the name of it, it's not the guillotine I'm talking about, but you know, when somebody in an old like castle or medieval town, they have their hands and their head sticking in that wooden thing, and people throwing fruit, you know it?
I don't remember what it's called, but it's like the shackles of shame. I can picture it.
That's exactly it. The shackles of shame. So that was a tool. That used to be a tool before law and order came in and police came in. Literally, shame, ostracization. Yeah. Quackery is the continuation of that. And, you know, how many of us feel comfortable standing on our own? How many of us, not me, how many people still remain in the spiritual closet because they don't want to come out and be shamed? Why is it so strong? I sense it's because what's happened in our history, particularly around the witch trials, particularly around superstition, particularly, frankly, around suppression of the wildness of the intuition of a free woman in that power. So bam, that got shut down. And it's I mean, I've spent years, and my whole first book explores this extensively. I continue on with the discussion a bit in my third book, and I go for it in my last book, No Holds Barred. It's the most advanced book. It's called The Dragon Master Creatrix. And I only mention it because if what I just said does resonate with you, check out The Dragon Master Creatrix, because I have a lot, it's me taking women on retreat internationally, getting trained in the ancient power mysteries, in remembering the ancient secrets and ancient wisdom as well. And it's told in story form, from a student's perspective in the beginning of each chapter, going to the sacred sites, the stone circles, receiving their attunements, getting trained in energy medicine and how it flows, interacting with others. But then the whole second half is like that yogic kind of book where it's a question and answer thing. And so they're not asking me questions like, Dr. Alison, what about opening my third eye? They're asking me questions like, how do I stop caring about what other people think of me? So the real substance of it is about getting free. And that's, to me, what we're talking about right now. I'll never forget, like in 2011, 2012, in that adjustment coming back to the States, I had an interview and the guy was saying, well, isn't this all just, it wasn't crackery. What was the other word that's always used? Woo-woo. Isn't this all just woo-woo? And I said to him, and this is just totally natural for me to say, there wasn't really righteous indignation. It was just kind of like, look at, man, if over half the rest of the world lives with understanding that the invisible is more important and in fact creates what shows up in the visible or in the physical, I think at this point it's rather ignorant and naive to not want to know about it. So no, I don't consider it woo-woo.
Yeah.
So Leah, you talked about me being a voice for earlier for a certain kind of facilitator. Listen to now, hear this voice too. For our system to shift. It's enough already.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, but we haven't really changed very much from the times you mentioned with the town squares, you know, that public display has just moved to our television. And I think the things are still there's an echo. There's a fear from the people who control us of what you call the wild, you know, and whether that is feminine or even masculine energy is kind of stunted at this point too, because there is danger when people understand and know the full potential of their power and just how powerful we actually are. But I want to move on from that. I can go on about that forever, but I want to move on. And you touched on it a little bit about the ego. So how would someone start moving away from their ego and being dependent upon that programming that they're used to?
Okay, I hope the echo will just tame down, please. And yes, we could have talked about that for a long time. But just to complete that for now, there would be no suppression if our genuine power wasn't something that threatened them. So moving into how do we work with the ego mind? So this whole thing requires courage. This whole thing requires you to want more for yourself. 85% is what I consider a conservative estimate of us, our daily choices, what to eat, what not to eat, where to go, what not to do, and even what doesn't fall on our radar as a possibility at all that I have to make a choice about. At least 85%, I say it's 90 to 95-ish% from all the work I've done with thousands and thousands of people at this point. We make our daily choices from an unconscious and subconscious level. So we are living robotically. So the ego mind is only 5 to 15% of where we make our choices from. And that's only the thoughts you hear. So I want to be clear about that, because when you sit in meditation, if you've ever tried it and you hear your thinking mind or you hear your thoughts, that's only at most 15% of what's really going on in your consciousness. So we have the unconscious, un means not. We have the subconscious, sub means under. So when we're learning to drive, neither of you any longer say, put foot on gas, put car in reverse, right? We've learned it. So we don't say it. It's in the subconscious. When we're growing up 0 to 2, we're not separate from our parents. We feel and think the same thing. And then at 2, when we start going, no, and it's that wonderful, terrible 2 stage for all you mothers and grandmothers and fathers and grandfathers out there, that separation is when the ego identity is starting to form. So 2 to 8 is when we sit there asking questions, how does it work? So if we want to feel love, everybody wants to feel love. So let's say we see our older brother getting a real loving feeling from mom. And we want that for ourselves. As in childlike logic, and it's so funny when I clear these out of people, it's hilarious. It's such childlike logic. Okay, so if older brother listens a lot to mom, doesn't talk a lot, but does a lot of listening, and that's when she gives him that yummy feeling. So if I want that yummy feeling, I've got to listen a lot. And so what that will end up is as an unconscious conclusion, as in, I get that yummy feeling, love, approval, if I listen. So some of that will go into the throat chakra, and that person will likely, depending on later life events, tend to be less comfortable with speaking and be more of a listener in a group. So that's a very simplistic way of saying that's our consciousness at the different levels. Trauma goes into the subconscious because the ego mind is given to us to navigate the physical plane. Our 5 physical senses have thresholds on them, because if we were actually perceiving with our 5 physical senses, seeing, hearing, etc., everything that's going on at the multidimensional level, we go nuts. So they have thresholds on them. And as we meditate these, or as we do this kind of work I'm talking about, we raise the threshold so we can see and perceive more. So the ego mind's given to us to be safe, to navigate this multidimensional plane as if we're in a jungle and there's lions and tigers and bears. Oh my, do I go into fight or do I go into flight? And while we still have that wiring, and you know all about the stress response at the brainstem, the ego mind's job is to protect us. So when we're looking to do something new habit, we are totally conditioned to repeat the past. So starting with, I really feel like if I were to say to you, to a person who's never done any of this before, look at your thoughts whenever you can, as you go through the day. I know that to require this step of detachment in development of the observer, because everybody who hasn't done any of this actually thinks and listens to their thoughts as if there's no choice, not even aware that there is a choice. If I have a depressing thought, here's another one. What if that's not even mine? What if that's my dying neighbor next to me? Because we're a hell of a lot more spongy, especially in this changing backdrop we're living in now from 2012 to 2032. We're a heck of a lot more open. I mean, you see it. There's more meditation, more yoga, more spiritual interest, more interest in the chakras, more interest in sound healing. All of this is humanity's spiritual awakening time. So we've also awakened. People's skins is more sensitive. People's digestion can't handle the toxicity as much because everything is being purified. Yeah, so I find it's quicker to have somebody be led, frankly, like if the ego is wanting to make more money or the ego is wanting to have better relationships. For people who are brand new to this, it's actually easier to hook them in. I'm not tricking them. I tell them this. I'm sitting here telling you this. Talk to the ego. You want more money? You want a better relationship? Work with me. But meanwhile, what's happening is blockages are getting cleared. Their heart's getting more aligned to their higher self. They're coming, and we're starting to purify the ego in the ego mind. And then in that, if you have that old unconscious belief, I have to just listen in order to get that yummy feeling, and that gets cleared, you have more freed up consciousness out of the conscious mind level. So during your day, now you can observe your thoughts saying, be quiet, don't say anything. And you can say, hey, hold on a second. I don't have to listen to you. I can make a different choice. And the new neurological wiring happens. You start going down a new neurological pathway. You start having new thoughts that lead to new choices, that lead to new behaviors. And you choose to speak up because you have that detachment first to observe your thoughts. And you have that detachment with the observer and the courage. The courage exists in the throat chakra. So I just pointed to my throat. The courage to choose something different, because I do a lot of time boosting courage and clearing out blocks to courage too. Does that help?
Yes, it does.
It does.
It's a lot.
And
it is.
It is.
When you are talking about the, I'll wait till my echo goes away. The subconscious, I always picture the subconscious as this floor that we stand on that's full of holes. And as we go about life and our environment and all the stimulus that we get, like it all trickles down and goes through the floor, but we can't ever access this floor. But instead, when it's time for our habits, or just as we go through life, the things that we don't think about, the things that just happen subconsciously, I feel like those are, remember like when you would go to the bank, this young people won't understand what I'm saying, but you would pull up and you would put your money or your checks in that tube and it would go through and like go whoop, suck and like go to the teller inside the bank. I picture that as our subconscious, like just it pops us little tubes for us to access, but we can't ever get down there. So that's what I was picturing when you were talking about it, but there is a way to open the floor and to see it. So anyways, I'm going to throw it to Leah. Go ahead.
Thank you. And Dr. Alison, it's your conversation has been really amazing. I've been just sitting by listening, like really absorbing what you're saying. And I think our listeners are going to be the same as well. And I did even have an article that I wanted to throw at you, which was about toxic positivity. But even as we're talking, I'm like, does it even really matter? But but I understand we do need to cover some of these topics. And but as I was thinking, the article is like basically going through and saying that toxic positivity is like, it's an assumption when, or the article calls it the assumption that despite our emotional pain or challenges in life, we should only have a positive mindset. And the lady in the article is trying to say, but sometimes that can be, I guess, kind of not so great in some ways with when relating to people. It's basically saying that can make people worse because it doesn't allow them to really express their emotions or feel the feels they need to feel, because you're really discounting their feelings by saying, don't worry, everything will be all right. And people have these little sayings. And so as we were talking, I was like thinking, like, is this article even really about, maybe it's about another way of kind of trying to like even say our emotions or spiritualism is just quackery again? Or is it really trying to say, no, we need to open up and like let our emotions come through? So if you know what I kind of mean. So what were your thoughts around that whole topic?
Quite honestly, the way that you're framing it. When I first read that article, Leah, I was like, oh, I didn't know what to make of it. And I wasn't excited about it. But the way you're asking it, I'm juiced up to talk about it, because this is what happens when my students, like my book I mentioned, my last book, my most recent one, the Dragon Master Creatrix, of my students being on retreat with me. It happens in Glastonbury, UK, England, which is the heart chakra of the planet. And there's a very strong goddess tradition there. And in fact, I do their attunements in the first house in over 1,000 years dedicated to the goddess in Europe. That was before Brexit. And there's this element of even the first 2 retreats they go on with me, getting them to be more embodied. And it's funny, when I went through just the first and the third chakra before the rites, I skipped the second. I found that interesting because I hardly ever do that. The second chakra, the sacral chakra, is your right to feel the way you feel. That's also near our ovaries. It covers the upper reproductive tract for men and the reproductive tract for women. And I know that is usually the last chakra to get itself cleared and then open and then emanating out, because it's supposed to emanate out of vortex, and each vortex ends up being your overall healthy field, which includes resilience and protection of a different sort. So that's usually the last one to give. It's usually the last one to clear. It is so deeply suppressed. I have the right to feel the way I feel. And this goes back a little bit to what we were talking about earlier. Do you guys remember how the vibrator was created? In England, in, I believe, the 1800s. I write about this in one of my books, and women were labeled with hysteria. And it was when women would speak up with what they were seeing intuitively and what they didn't like, and their husbands didn't like that. So either they got thrown in an asylum. And I had an 80-year-old female client in like 2012, and she had in the 50s, because she'd been uppity and voicing what she didn't like, been thrown. It was that recent into an insane asylum, or however you want to call it. But women were quieted down by this one doctor because he would bring them to masturbation. So he realized and created the vibrator. That's how the vibrator got created, ultimately to shut up women. So I'm not like this. This is not the nature of my work, but I seem to be with 2 women who are drawing it out of me. It's not the only nature of my work. But when you ask about how do I let myself feel what I want to feel and not feel guilty about not remaining totally positive, like the law of attraction tells me I'm supposed to, it's just unrealistic. There's a lot of spiritual memes and spiritual inspirational stuff that is a great soundbite, really good for social media. But then I hear people left and right wanting to implement that and making themselves feel bad and wrong and shame and giving up because they haven't been able to achieve what that pithy saying on that meme on social media said to them. It is not realistic. You can't go through life with their sunshiny attitude all the time. However, if you think back to the beginning of the show, when I was talking about having that sense of all of life is happening for me, not to me. So even if my mind is interpreting this event as something bad or wrong, I'm not going to listen to it. I'm going to sit back and knowing that I am actually in very great part creating everything that shows up in my life, or 85-ish%, 90%, because I believe in random stuff and I believe in karma. I don't, and this is another thing that people do to themselves in the spiritual community, is if they don't, if something bad shows up, what did I do to bring this into my field? What did I do to attract this to myself? And there is randomness. So I'm very logical with all of this. I'm not like, just trying to give sound bites. And one of the deepest ways women access their power is by going into their feelings, by going into their body, by going into their lower belly. And it's interesting to me too. Here's another one: the ruining of the earth. The earth is considered Gaia, feminine. What do we do to our bodies to lose weight, to contort it, to be, the perfect breast, the perfect waist, the perfect hips? How healthy are the average female's body images in the teens? So there's this destruction of the feminine that seems to be a theme in our conversation today. But because we access very much of our power by letting ourselves feel what we feel. So it feels like the woman who wrote that article was saying along the lines what I'm saying, in allowing yourself to feel what you feel, but not be taken down by them. Still, again, with the sense of that detachment. Wow, I'm really upset about this. I need to do something about it, rather than stuffing it down with food or whatever other way that someone will stuff it away and not listen to it.
And sometimes it's just acknowledgement, right?
Totally.
I'm allowed to feel this way.
Well, that's the right. If every chakra has a right to it, that one is, I have the right to feel the way I feel. And like I said, really, it's like the last chakra to come online, because the average person, male or female, has like little to no relationship with their feelings, never mind a healthy one, to actually feeling what they feel and not talking it down, dismissing it, talking it away, or making it into something it's not, but just allowing yourself to feel. And you're absolutely right on. There's actually a saying, like there's a whole story about the goddess Isis, who was able to talk about the scorpions, and just by naming the negativity or the toxin, you're doing a lot of good work there. Like it's allowed to heal and shift.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. This has been really great.
Yeah.
Great. I've got a bit of an echo here, but
yeah, sorry about that too.
Sorry. Yeah. But I just wanted to say thank you. And if there's something that you'd like to share with our listeners, maybe a tip or a thought before we wrap up, and then I'd also love for you to share how people can connect with you and get in contact with you, and maybe even a little bit about the work that you do. So if someone's interested.
Okay. I feel like you're going to probably want to go back in and listen to this, listeners. That will be my last word. I don't feel like I need to add anything else. There was a lot in there and I go fast. So we're done there. That's enough for you. It feels like the way to reach me, you can go to vibrationalupgrade.com. There is an Activate Your Magic program that is relatively affordable for most people. And you can step right into receiving my work, the work I've been talking about today. It's under $100 US and it's a monthly program. So that's Activate Your Magic. I believe it's even activateyourmagic.com. But my overall website is Vibrational Upgrade. My books are all on Amazon, but you have to put the middle initial J. And that's that.
Well, that's fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Such an echo here, right? Sorry about that echo, but thank you so much. It was a real treat being with you guys and closing out mostly my work week, just about another hour or two left. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Well, that's the end of today's episode. Our theme music is created by Andrew Bowden and production services are by Kevin Kennedy Spain of Disc of Light Media. Have a great week, everyone.
Namaste.
Namaste.